It's still that same problem where I can't read the whole. Just everything is dumb. All right.
All right, everyone, warm up those brains. It's time for the Get More Smarter podcast. This is episode 239. I'm Jason Bain.
I'm Ian Silveri. This week on the Get More Smarter podcast. What do you call it when you throw a press conference, get booed by the crowd so loud you can't hear the questions from the press, and try and sell a very unpopular bill outside your district? We ask our seventh favorite member of Congress from Colorado. Then, our favorite Congressional Bread sandwich surrenders to Trump and Speaker Mike Johnson and sets up every rural hospital in his district for disaster for really no reason at all. Then, in a new segment, Governor Polis vetoes more bills. We talk about all the bills Governor Polis is vetoing, and some of them may surprise you. And finally, we take a peek at the 2026 candidate roster to see how primary elections that are now only a whole year away are shaping up. But first, he's the legendary liberal columnist for the Colorado Sun and our guest today. Mike Littwin joins us to talk Trump, Colorado's media, the state of U.S. journalism, and what gives him hope. Take a listen. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our guest today, Mike Littwin, who has been a columnist for too many years to count. He has covered Dr. J, 4 presidential inaugurations, 6 national conventions, and countless brain-numbing speeches in New Hampshire and Iowa, where I hear it's very cold. He has written for basically every Colorado outlet worth a rip, including the Rocky Mountain News, the Denver Post, the Colorado Independent, and now the Colorado Sun, where he writes about all things Colorado, from news to sports to pop culture, as well as local and national politics. This interview is a long time coming, so Mike Littwin, welcome to the Get More Smarter podcast.
So glad to be here with you guys, two of my favorite guys.
Oh, thanks, man.
Well, you've been covering Colorado politics since, I think, 1997, and is that
That's
about
when
right?
I arrived. If you remember all the way back in the time back machine, came here as a sports columnist for 2 years.
Yeah, that's right.
Then I became a news columnist right before the Bush v. Gore triple overtime.
So at the time you started covering politics in Colorado, Democrats were still having trouble winning statewide races. Now Colorado is virtually unwinnable for Republicans. How do you explain to people what happened here?
Well, I'd like to think that it was my column that changed everything, but probably can't take the credit. But it's demographics. Demographics, a million people moved here when it was dead red, and many of those apparently were blue. Many more were blue than not. And, the Latino vote, back when the Latino vote was mostly Democratic, doesn't seem to be the case anymore. But that came out, heavily. So it was really as simple as demographics. I mean, there was, that whole thing about how they won the legislature, the Democrats. That was something, but it wasn't the real thing. The real thing is demographics. So that's, I grew up mostly in the state of Virginia, which is very similar to Colorado in demographically. And they did the same thing, changed it around the same time. It was because people who moved there changed what it was. So if we were still in old Colorado, it would still be deep red.
Well, this is a different political era now because of the man in the White House. How different is covering Trump's second term been compared to anything else you've done in politics?
There is nothing remotely similar, and that includes Trump's first term. I mean, it's so, it's the blitzkrieg effect. It never stops coming, no matter who rules against him, no matter what the courts do. The courts have been pretty solid so far, but we're a long way from seeing what the Supreme Court does with all these issues. They've upheld some preliminary injunctions and stuff, but we're a long way from the Supreme Court deciding things. So we'll have to see. Have to see what John Roberts does. Have to see what Amy Coney Barrett does. They're the two most important people in America right now.
You mentioned the blitzkrieg, and I think that's an unfortunately apt example or a metaphor for what we're dealing with here. We talk a lot on the show about, what we choose to discuss, which is like, how do you tell if something he's doing is genuinely unprecedented and genuinely threatening versus just kind of the outrage of the day?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. One, I write with a lot of humor in my column, hopefully. And so I make fun of him. So if there's something to particularly make fun of him about, he hates being made fun of course. So I'm not sure he reads my column, but I wish he would. So that you heard about that taco question that
Yeah,
happened
it sent
in.
him into a
So
real tailspin. Yeah.
yeah. So what's to stand for? Trump always chickens out. So that really upset him. So the ridicule works, and when I can ridicule him, I do. But what is the important stuff? I try to stick to the important stuff that where we're headed toward authoritarianism. What is standing between that and where is it breaking down? So that's my general theme for what's really important. And when that covers a wide area, but I just wrote about Harvard and Trump, and that was obviously a place where it's breaking down. If he can basically destroy the world's best, greatest, most powerful university, then what comes next? That's a big guardrail to be
Mm.
knocked out. So that's what he's trying to do. And he's using everything. He's using stuff that nobody could even have imagined he used. I mean, one of the civil rights things, of course, it's always hilarious when the racists talk about somebody else being racist, meaning that they don't give everything to white males. So, which is basically what Trump's version of racism is. So, but they used one part against Harvard that was designed to take on places like Bob Jones University and bring some, knock down the racists. And no, so now they're trying to use it. Now, I don't think the courts will ever uphold it, but they're trying to use the same kind of logic, or in their case, illogic, to the idea of, against DEI. So, DEI is at the heart of everything only because it's a big tool for him. And he can take every civil rights case because of the affirmative action rulings in the Supreme Court. He could take every civil rights case and try to apply DEI to that to say it's being unfair to the poor white males of our country, like us. No, but we're having a rough go. I know. I
Well,
think
he
some
even
people.
used it for airplanes.
I think he did use it for airplanes exactly, but I think we're okay compared to
I
many
feel like,
people.
yeah, I'm not in a position where I need very much help right now. And I see lots of other people out there who do. And I think it's all insane. You mentioned that this covering this administration is unlike anything, including his first go around. What's the most surprising or dangerous aspect of how his second term is going so far, in your view?
Well, we know more about his first term. We can't learn more and more after his first term, after when all the books came out, right?
Right.
So, and telling the story of, and there were a lot of people that Trump hired, the best people, who stood in his way and stopped him from doing stuff. The Pentagon, the
Right.
Department of Justice, the FBI even, and they stood in his way, and now there's nobody standing in his way. He's only, I mean, the North Korean cabinet meetings that he has, where everyone goes around the room and says how
Right.
much they love the dear leader. I saw that Putin has actually put up a new statue of Stalin. Really? I mean, in 2025, is Germany going to put up a Hitler statue too? I mean, this is we don't there's no roadblocks within his administration. It's got Hegseth who's charge of the military, and what are they doing? Why are they sending all these troops to the border? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Why are they? They're they'd love to have one of these protests turn violent.
Yeah.
They'd love. I just read a book on Kent State. They'd love to have one of these protests turn violent. Kent State was that they burned down the Rossi building the night before, so that was the key where people came in and the shooting started, and they'd love to have that. So I hope that it never does get to that point, but it could.
Mm.
But they're lined up for all that. They've National Guards lined up for all that. National Guards from red states cross borders to go to other red states, and it's eh, it's scary. I mean, I think that's another thing. When I get scared, and as cynical, and much as I've seen in my lifetime, I grew up in the 60s where, where there's a lot of parallels to. And when I get scared, I point that out.
It makes me feel like when you're on an airplane and the flight attendants start freaking out from the turbulence, something's like actually wrong.
Then you knew there's trouble.
When you think about this presidency on a percentage scale, what percent would you say is Trump doing about what you thought he would do, and what percent is like, whoa, I didn't see that coming?
Well, he's done more than anybody thought he would do. I mean, for those of us who warned about Trump before he became president again, and we did, you and I did, you guys and I did, it's much worse than I thought. It's much worse than I ever predicted.
Yeah.
The speed of it is what's amazing. And of course, if Elon Musk hadn't gotten involved, it would not have been the same thing. So Musk brought in his $300 billion or whatever it is to the game, and bought Trump off with his $270 million campaign contributions. So him getting this job at Doge, which is basically his idea, and Trump allowing it, if it hadn't been Musk, it would not have happened that way. I can't see anybody else who Republicans would just fall over for in the way they did. So it's it's part of the Trump, Musk, MAGA fear factor that every Republican faces. And Lisa Murkowski said, we're all afraid. And I've talked to several Democratic senators who tell me that Republicans come to them all the time and say, we want to do the right thing, but we're scared to do the right thing.
So that's actually that's the follow-up question I have for you. Like, are you surprised at the degree to which Republicans have just rolled over for him? Like the theme of this administration, there's just no dissent this time around.
When McCarthy was still House Speaker, and after January 6th, he basically laid this at Trump's feet and said he was to blame for this. And when he then started getting the feeling that this was a horribly wrong thing for him to say, with MAGA still very much a factor, and went down to Mar-a-Lago and kissed the ring, that was the start of everything for the Republicans. And you can think back to 2016, before Trump's election, when Cory Gardner's and those people basically said they couldn't vote for Trump. They voted for, I don't know who guys would vote for, dead Ronald
I think he
Reagan.
said he wrote in Paul Ryan, if I recall correctly.
Paul Ryan, okay.
And now he's proud of it.
Another person that MAGA hates.
Right, so, there you
go. So I'm not surprised Republicans have rolled over, but they need 3 votes in the Senate, right? They need 4 votes in the Senate because J.D. Vance is now if they ever get votes in Congress, they've got one on the big beautiful bill, which, so you talk about making fun of something. That's actually the name of the bill.
Yeah. No.
The Big Beautiful Bill Act. Does that tell? How much does that tell you about Trump's narcissism? What could be more narcissistic, and what could be more enabling that Mike Johnson would name this bill the Big Beautiful Bill? Have you ever heard anything like that?
No. I was surprised, even as much as I have come to expect Republicans rolling over. Voting for this bill in a normal time would be a political death sentence. You don't cut Medicaid and food stamps and even Medicare. What changed? Why do they not care about what this is going to do to their own futures?
So let's go back to the beginning, and I can't believe we're just a few months in. It seems like a forever, right?
Yeah.
So when they proved all those crazy nominees, and Trump put up the craziest of the crazies as a test. This is, as much as anything, it was a test of the Republicans in the Senate. Will they bow down and take anything? Will they take a really unqualified Pete Hegseth, a really unqualified Tulsi Gabbard, a really unqualified Lutnick? Go down the list. RFK Jr., of course, who I've had much fun with over time. Jared Polis's refusal to say, I made a mistake on that one. He refuses to say that. I've asked several times. He refuses to say it. So I'll keep writing about it, whatever office he runs for, until he says, no, I really screwed up. So when you look
So,
back
yeah.
at that part, when all those guys got in,
Yeah, that's a good point.
Kash Patel, all those guys got in, you know, that told you everything about what was going to happen. I mean, so sure, they're going to vote for some bill that has a million different things in it, and they're going to lie about what happens to Medicare, and they're going to lie about what happens to Medicaid. They're going to say we're only going to kick off able-bodied males who should be working anyway, and that's a complete lie. I mean, the numbers say there's so few able-bodied male Medicaid receivers who are not working. A lot of them are working day jobs. That's where we are in this country, where a lot of working class people are in this economy. To have to have to go through all the paperwork to keep your Medicaid coming when you're making like $15,000 a year or whatever,
Right.
then it's too hard. I mean, it's too complicated. If these people were college educated, they wouldn't be doing day jobs and wouldn't be doing day work. So, it's all meant not to cut people out, but for them just to fade away. And that's what will happen if this thing passes the Senate, and it may not pass the Senate.
Trump has directly targeted Colorado through lawsuits and threats against the Denver's mayor, Mike Johnston, Attorney General Phil Weiser. I guess that was more of a Truth Social post, and Governor Polis. What do you think, if you were advising these guys politically, what should the mayor, the governor, and the AG be doing to fight back against this? Or is it better to ignore the bully until he finds another target to go yell at?
Well, I'm extremely disappointed in Jared Polis's response. And one that most disappointed me was when they had those couple of raids in Colorado, and Polis stood up and said that he welcomed them coming in here. We need to get the criminals off the streets, when we've seen in the aftermath how few people actually seem to be criminals. Nobody gets charged with these things. The ones they
Right.
can send off to El Salvador, they do, I guess. There's no charges. None of the raids have had any charges against anybody. So what are they doing? What violent criminals are they getting? I'm not saying that the thing that happened in where was it, in Adams County, I guess. I'm not saying those guys weren't gangbangers. They were, but you still have to have some evidence against them in order to make them actual criminals. They're not criminals until they've been ruled a criminal.
Right.
So I was disappointed in Polis, and I would like Bennett and Hickenlooper, who both say the right thing. I like to see them say it more loudly. I like to see them say it more demonstrably. There's some dismissal among moderate Democrats about show horses, Chris Murphy and AOC and even Cory Booker, but is what's required. That's what's required. And Johnson has, he's put himself in positions where he's talked before he actually knew what he was saying, and has had to back down a few times. That's not a good place to be either. I think overall he's done well, but I think overall he's done better than the other leading politicians in Colorado. But he's made himself look foolish a couple of times. And so that doesn't help your cause. But I'm a big believer, and I've been saying from day one, resist. And we don't know exactly how to resist on day one, but now we're getting a lot more evidence as to what is successful in resisting. And so my message to everybody is to resist. And to these guys, you are in positions of power. You need to resist more visibly and more volubly than they're doing now. I mean, they say the right things. It's not like they don't, not like they're in there praising Trump. They say that Trump shouldn't be doing this and say that Trump isn't doing that, but they don't say it enough or as loudly. Not as loudly as you guys say it, not as loudly as I say it. They don't, and they should.
I want to talk about something a little different. You recently wrote about what you called cowardice among Democrats regarding President Biden's decision to run again in 2024. Yes. Hindsight is always 2020, of course, but how should Democrats have handled that situation differently?
Biden said when he ran that he would be a transitional president. He didn't
Right.
define what that meant, and he used it because people knew he was old. And so it's suggestive of the fact that he might only do one term. And those of us who weren't like in love with Biden as a candidate, we took that to heart. A lot of us took that to heart, that he recognizes the Democrats have a decent younger bench. They need to get younger, and that a 4-year transition could be exactly what the country needs. So I wrote in 2023 early that he should step aside, but that the problem is that he wasn't going to.
Right.
So as loudly as anybody wanted to say he should step aside, he wasn't going to step aside. And that's the place where Democrats found themselves. Two problems. One is just party loyalty, which that was a failure on their part. And two, a lot of people, even senators, didn't know how bad a shape he was in. They didn't see him that often. He wasn't out there that often. He did that State of the Union speech where he had this really good speech. I wrote that I don't see how a guy can have dementia and give this speech. And my wife died of dementia. I know something about the disease. She
Right.
couldn't have given an hour-long speech 5 years before she died. And so that fooled some people. Bennett was the first senator to say that that uh, that Biden could very well lose in a landslide. And he
Yeah.
didn't quite say for him to step aside, but he didn't really have to. I said he should have, but he didn't really have to, because the message was clear. We're going to lose if this guy's the candidate, and we may lose in a landslide. And what a lot of Democrats will tell you is that even when they knew they were going to lose, they felt paralyzed as to what to do. So Nancy Pelosi was the person who got get Biden. That
Yeah.
said, to get Biden to step down. Nancy Pelosi was the brave one who stood up, took all the heat, took all the heat from a lot of other Democrats on this, stood up and basically said when Biden said he was going to stay, he was going to continue to run, she said, "Well, we're still waiting to hear what he has to say." So she didn't
Yeah.
let him get away with saying that. She kept the pressure on him. Democrats needed to be they needed to be stronger, and then they weren't. They weren't strong in the time we need to be strong. So I think if Biden had stepped aside 3 months earlier, and they'd been able to have a mini primary of some kind,
Right.
and who knows who the candidate would have been. My guess is it wouldn't have been Kamala. Not that I think Kamala did a terrible job. I don't. But she was stuck to Biden. Biden didn't say to her what he should have said to her, which is, throw me under the bus. This is not about me. This is about beating Donald Trump. That's why I ran the first time. And that's what you're doing now. Don't worry about me. You don't have to defend me. Go out there and just go after Donald Trump and have your own platform. Be your own person. If they'd had 3 more months or something to do that, they could have had a real campaign. So Democrats should have acted earlier, but the inner circle, they really are guilty. And Biden himself really is guilty. I mean, Biden's still saying today that he would have won if he had run, which is patently ridiculous. Still saying it, that hurts the Democratic Party as much as anything that anyone else is not doing.
So I wanted to ask you about some recent errors from the Trump administration. First, they released a Make America Healthy Again report full of errors and references to non-existent studies that appears to be done with some kind of shitty AI. And then the Department of Homeland Security released a list of sanctuary jurisdictions that was a complete misspelling numerous city names in Colorado, reversing the names of cities and counties in other states. So my question is this: are we seeing a new level of incompetence or just a different type of incompetence?
No, I think we're seeing a new level, higher level of incompetence, because There are so few people involved in this administration who are competent. I mean, the list, which they would misspell if they gave you a list, the list would be, just this big. It's just amazing. People, they have Pete Eggs in charge of our military. I mean, seriously? So if they can't spell the
Yeah,
name right,
I thought Hegseth was gonna like go the way of Matt Gaetz, where it was like, yeah, we're floating this, and it's like not real. You said this earlier, but it's like, was this just like a loyalty test to see like how far he could push it? And the answer is like Republicans voted yes on every single nominee except I think Mitch McConnell voted no on Tulsi Gabbard. Like that was maybe the only exception.
They should have
I think no, there were a
put
couple of
forward.
other, there were a couple of on Hexeth. Did they get all of them? There were people who
I
voted
mean, they got
against.
Joni Ernst. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the hypocrisy. It's such a high level that's another part that's unprecedented. I mean, hypocrisy is endemic to politics, right? But at this level, I
It's a
can't
feature.
remember. Yeah, not a bug. And
So
we go back to Watergate era when Republicans finally, Howard Baker famously, with other Republicans, went into Nixon and said, "You got to go." And there's nothing like that could possibly happen now.
no, and if it didn't happen the first time around, it's not going to happen this time around. And they're even more in the cult. They're even more afraid of him. Let's switch gears for a second. The reason that we actually invited you on the show, or the column that sort of prompted me to reach out to you again, was called "It's My Fifth Anniversary at the Sun, a news site where you can still practice journalism." I'm curious because, I work in a lot of states across the country, and Colorado just has a uniquely robust media ecosystem. We still have really good on our nightly news stations. We still have really good in-depth investigative journalism, and we have new outlets sprouting up like the Sun. What do you think the Sun is doing right that other outlets in Colorado and elsewhere are either not doing or doing wrong?
Well, I think one of the main things they're doing right, and it's a sad thing to say, is that they're raising a lot of money. So they have a high subscription base, ever growing subscription base. If they give it to you, lots of people pay for it, and in which case you get my column early as a benefit if you pay for it. So
Yeah, and that's a benefit that I'm happy to pay for. It's your piece. It's the unaffiliated, the Sunriser. I actually do love the newsletters, and it's weird to think that, like, in a weird way, email saved the newspaper industry.
that is weird, and so I think that's one of the things they've done really well. That's most of the credit goes to Larry Rickman, who used to be the editor and who is now the publisher. I just call him all around poobah. And he's done a tremendous job as a newspaper person who came into this with no real knowledge of how to do any of that stuff. And he's learned on the fly, and he's done a great job. So our staff has doubled since in those 5 years. So that has allowed us to be a better, I still say newspaper, news website. And so that's one of the things they've done really well. And because they've doubled the staff, and because they're are real journalists, newspaper people, most of the best people from the Post came to the Sun. And so they started out with top-notch journalists. And the other thing that they've done, as opposed to what newspapers are still trying to do, is they've narrowed the scope of what they cover. So they don't cover sports, they don't cover arts, So like the Denver Post, they try to be the newspaper that they were. They do not have the staff to be the newspaper that they were, and so that leads to real problems.
Who else do you think is doing it right in Colorado?
I think Colorado Public Radio does a really good job, and
Yeah,
and what they cover. I think that the what they have going with all the places that are through Colorado Lab and all that, the places are working together. My old editors, Susan Green and Tina Grego, were did great work doing that. Now they're off to other wild spaces. And I think that I love Kyle Clark. I think brings a different kind of newscast than almost anybody in the country is doing. And it's great that he's staying in Denver because he's had offers to go everywhere, go national.
Sure.
He's stayed here, and I think the news stations in general are good. And but I think Kyle is special, and I think he makes a big difference in in what the conversation is about in politics and other stuff, but especially about politics. He sort of guides the conversation, sort of the way that talk radio used to. And so, when I wrote a column when talk radio was big, if they started talking about my column, which they often would, and saying hateful things, because most talk radio was right-wing radio. So, but that would up my number of people going to my column. So worked out fine for me. I don't care what nasty thing they say about me. That's all part of the game.
Right. Do you think Colorado media would be covering this moment in time differently if the Rocky Mountain News were still around?
Oh, yeah. I mean, not just if the Rocky Mountain News were still around. If the Rocky Mountain News and Denver Post were staffed the way they were in the when the 2008 election, when the convention was in Denver, me Springelmeyer went to Iowa and lived there for 6 months or so before the election.
Right.
So he was there in Iowa. Of the 18 months of the election, starting from the beginning of the primaries, I was on the road for 9 months covering the election.
Wow.
So, I mean, and the Post did similar things. And so we were committed to doing it as well as anybody else we hoped was doing it. And we made real sacrifices on our bottom line because it wasn't like the Rocky was rich. And that's what we did because there was competition, one thing. And even when they signed the JOA, the competition between the reporters never changed. So yeah, so it wouldn't be today if there were a Rocky that had 50 reporters, 50 people in their newsroom. Then we had 300 people on newsroom, and the Post had 300 people.
Wow.
That's like unfathomable. Like you just said,
yeah, and it just
the Sun doubled its staff. And how many do you have there total now?
20 something.
Right.
20 something.
And like you're covering the whole state, but to your point, it's a narrow focus and you're just covering the state. Like, I don't think the Sun is probably going to be sending anybody on tour with the Democratic primary and Republican primaries in 2028, right? Like,
let's hope they can find money to do that, but I don't know. Probably not. Not today. They couldn't.
right.
So yeah, that's a big part of it. So I came here because of the newspaper war. That's why I came to Denver, and I came here from Baltimore. And I wanted to be part of a newspaper war, and it was one of the last really good newspaper wars. They still have a couple of places where they have not very many. But the thing about the Rocky and the Post, well, even though that one was tabloid, one was long, that they were the same kind of newspaper, basically. So it wasn't like the Chicago Tribune competing against the Chicago Sun-Times. It wasn't like the New York Times competing with the Daily News. They were completely different kinds of newspapers. We were basically the same kind of newspaper, going after the same kinds of stories. And every reporter on both staffs was scared to death that they'd gotten scooped by the other paper. Because then they had to go see their editor and said, "What the hell happened here?" Right? So that was so much fun, and that's why I came to Denver, and I loved the newspaper war. It was great fun, and that's never going to happen again.
Yeah, That's unfortunately true. You called the decision by the Washington Post and the LA Times not to endorse in the 2024 presidential election bending a knee to political power. And then, of course, the Washington Post took their slogan, which was "Democracy dies in darkness," off their masthead. What do you think that says about the current state of American journalism more largely?
Well, you know, so Bezos buys the Washington Post. Washington Post is, they want to be a great newspaper. And they have been a great newspaper. And they want to remain a great newspaper. So Bezos comes in, and they weren't making enough money. Bezos comes in, basically says, "I'm not that interested in making money. I can afford to do this as a vanity thing." And so that seemed to have been a great thing. But then we moved on to the oligarchy isn't new, but it suddenly came into focus when the three guys were sitting up on the on the stage with Donald Trump during his inauguration. And when Bezos bent the knee at the Washington Post, which is, I've got a T-shirt from a few years earlier saying that we're not after anybody. We're just doing the work. And so that's gone now. Bezos, I mean, if you read the Washington Post, you don't see really that much difference, but it's there. It's there if you read it really closely and you've read it closely for years. What's happened? What's happened with CBS and 60 Minutes, where they just caved in a lawsuit that the Trump could never win.
Right.
Everybody
Not in a
knows that
million years.
Trump could
So it was a
never
bribe. They just
win.
paid him off.
Well, they're trying to pay them off. He offered him $15 million, and Trump said, "Nah, I need more. I want $25 million." So, and the LA Times guy, he wanted to get in Trump's good graces, and he's ruined editorial page, and he's another one of these billionaires. But the LA Times has lost. When I worked at the LA Times, we had 1,300 people in the
Jesus.
newsroom.
Wow.
We had 1,300 people. We had 60 people in Washington, D.C. We had about 30 foreign bureaus. So this was in the fat old days in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And so that paper, they're still a big paper, and I think they still have about 500 people in the newsroom, but they used to have 1,300. And then we've always had the Gannett's and people who own Denver Post, whether Alden, it's people.
Alden Global Capital, yeah.
Yeah, Vulture, Alden Global, Vulture Capital. Yeah, so those people were always around, and now they've gotten worse. Those people have gotten worse. So they stripped normal newspapers like the Denver Post, like you name the paper, San Jose. You name the paper that were really good regional papers. There are a couple of good regional papers left. The Philadelphia Inquirer went to a whole new thing where they're basically a nonprofit. The Boston Globe is still a pretty good newspaper, but there used to be, yeah, I would say 25 newspapers that were really good, that covered stuff really well, where real journalism was being done. ProPublica, my friend Tina Griego just went to join ProPublica, which is great for her and great for ProPublica. And they do amazing stuff. But again, they're focused very narrowly on what they do. So they're not a newspaper. They're an investigative unit or whatever you call it. They're great. I'm so glad they're around. But it's not a newspaper. But they do great work, of course. The Wall Street Journal, if you don't read the editorials, it's
Right,
still
it's
a
the
good
opposite.
newspaper.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm pretty unhappy with the editorial page of the Denver Post. It's not what it used to be. And Denver Gazette it's just a right-wing newspaper.
It's nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, ever since I left the Post, you could say that things have really gone downhill. So I'm with you there.
They have gone downhill.
I'm curious about how you think about the role of opinion journalism now, as somebody who's been called a liberal columnist in the past. Do you think you are persuading readers, or does it feel more like preaching to the choir?
I fortunately know that I have lots of readers who are not liberals like me, or not progressives like me. A lot of people, I don't know the numbers, but a lot of people read me who want to read the other side. There's still people out there like that.
Right.
So, and if you look at state of politics in America right now, where everything's about the 10% persuadables.
Right.
That's all there is that matters in elections these days. So if a significant part of the 10% persuadables are reading columns like mine, that matters. So I feel I wouldn't do it if I didn't think that I was still had some impact. When I worked at the LA Times, I had 1 million readers.
Wow.
It had more, obviously had more impact there. And I don't have the same impact I had when the Rocky and the Post were in that newspaper war, when the Denver had the greatest percentage of newspaper readership in any city in America.
No way. I'd be
Yeah,
surprised if that wasn't still like largely true.
it might be.
Let me ask you this, though, do you think there is value in preaching to the choir as an opinion columnist?
Yeah, I do. And because all liberal columnists are not the same, I mean, we're very different. And don't write the same way. And I always think if I've been successful in a column that lots of people have written about, if I can move the argument just like this much, can you see that? If you can move the
Mm-hmm.
argument just this much, then I've succeeded in some way. So if somebody looks at my column and says, well, I hadn't thought of it that way, even if they agree with me, they might not have thought of it that way, then I think I've done something. So, I'm a liberal columnist who rips Jared Polis a lot. And I sort of ignore Hickenlooper because I guess I have to write about him now in this coming election. I think he's not a real force in the Senate. And I'm sort of surprised that he's running for a second term. And I think Michael Bennet, despite the fact that most progressives seem to hate him, I think he's a really good senator and a very smart guy. And I don't think he's still in the pocket of Anschutz, as every progressive says. So I give a different view on Polis than most liberal columnists would in Colorado. So I know that's different. And I'm not in anybody's pocket. I don't I don't toe a party line. I say when I think Joe Biden should step aside, I say it without any fear of somebody saying, "Oh no, you can't say that." So
Right.
it's also so I'm I can be almost completely honest when I'm writing. Yeah.
Well, let's finish where we started. Given
Yeah.
everything you've observed about Trump, his supporters, the resistance this time around being different, what are you looking for as indicators as to where the presidency is heading? Like, the courts are acting as a check. He's listening to some orders, he's ignoring others. What do you play the string out a little bit for the next 2 or 4 years? Like, where do you think we're going? You said they did a lot of stuff really fast at the beginning. We agree, but where do you think we're headed now?
Well, that's a hard question. I mean, I think for Democrats opposing Trump, I mean, everything is 2026. That's everything. That election. So it's almost impossible for Democrats to take back the Senate. It's almost
Mhm.
impossible. It'd be a miracle. But they should, by any historical measure, take back the House.
Yeah,
And that means that Trump won't be able to pass anything through Congress. So
right.
that will make a difference. And so Democrats are pinning their hopes on that entirely. And that's part of why they don't know what to do. It's part of why they're paralyzed, deer in the headlights. I don't want to put the word. They don't quite know how to oppose because they know all they can do is blow it. They got to make sure they don't blow it, and that's what they're worried about. When I say they're being cowards and I say they're being overly cautious, they're thinking of it. I don't have to think of it in electoral terms. They do have to think of it in electoral terms. So there'll be a big race. There'll be a big race in the eighth in Colorado. That'll matter. It's a matter of swinging 4 seats, I think, 3 or 4 seats. And
Yeah.
so, there'll be huge amounts of money put into that. Where Trump will go next, it's really up. A lot of it's up to the Supreme Court, and that's still very much a wild card. They've made some temporary rulings against Trump, but they haven't really ever ruled on what any of the important stuff is. The illegal alien
Yeah, the Alien Enemies Act from the 1700s. Yeah, exactly.
in '98. Yeah, Supreme Court has to rule on that. Supreme Court has to rule on whether whether there's a national emergency that allows Trump to set all these tariffs without going to Congress. So the Supreme Court has to rule on that. There's a whole list of things down the line that the Supreme Court will have to rule on. And this whole taco thing that Trump always chickens out. The question is, his approval ratings, this is the worst news I could think of. His approval ratings went down and then they came up some. So, and I think the reason they came up some because everyone was scared of the tariffs and we're not feeling any effect of the tariffs yet. So when the
Right.
tariffs go into effect, if they go into effect, how big they are, all that stuff, nobody knows. The markets don't know. They go up on a prayer. They go down and, oh no, what did we just do? And they don't know. They have no idea. Nobody knows. Trump doesn't know. So how that works out, if people are upset, really upset, Trump will cave in some areas. Even though hopefully he's not running for election in 2028, he will cave in some areas. So popular opinion matters. And the reason I keep writing about resistance is the resistance matters because it gets people aware. It
Right.
makes people more aware of what's going on. When there's not a resistance, most people, sadly, and this is not new. They don't understand most of the issues in front of them. They don't, most people don't know what tariffs mean, including Donald Trump, apparently. And so they don't know what tariffs mean. If you listen to Trump, he tells you one thing. Democrats, because of the labor unions, used to be pro-tariff.
Right.
Now,
Although I've been surprised that the polling has shown actually that more, like 2 in 3 people say they understand tariffs, which is more than I thought it would be.
well, let's say they understand tariffs. That goes back to
Right.
goes back to the what's the thing called, the Dunning thing where
Dunning-Kruger effect. Yeah.
yeah, the real sign of a dumb person is he doesn't know that he's dumb. So, I don't believe that 2/3 of people know what tariffs are, and I really don't think they have any understanding of what the effects are. They do know that if tariffs are high, that eventually things will cost more, and and if China's tariffs settle in at 50%, then that's going to have a huge impact on people going to Target or wherever, and going to that will make a difference buying their next iPhone. I mean, a lot of people are buying iPhones right now because they're afraid they're going to be $1,000 more next year. So it's, what Trump will do is still dependent on what he can get away with. So, he got rid of Elon, right? He got rid of Elon when Elon became too much of a burden for him. So will RFK Jr. eventually become too much of a burden for him? He might. So let's say this measles outbreak, which is the largest we've had in decades, but let's say it becomes a real outbreak where we're talking about thousands, tens of thousands of people getting measles and getting into schools. And, will RFK Jr. be too much of a cross to bear? I think he would be. So that's a crazy thing. I don't know if you guys watch Bulwark, which is, those guys are really good. They're former Republicans who have become moderate Democrats, I guess. But it's a question of whether do you root for bad things to happen because it's bad for Donald Trump, but it's also bad for us?
Right.
Or do you root for better things to happen but that would be good for Donald Trump? So that's like a conundrum, right? I don't know what the right answer is. I think you have to go place by place, issue by issue as to go there. If you don't want people being hurt, Medicaid being cut would be bad for Trump. I think many of his people are on Medicaid, so I think it would be bad for Trump. But I don't want people cut off Medicaid. I think it's
Right.
really important. It's a huge part of the safety net, which isn't as safe as it should be. But you take that part away, you're losing a huge part. The Medicare is going to take a hit. So they keep saying it's not going to take a hit, but it is going to take a hit.
Yeah.
And so you can't root for those things, even though those things would be bad for Trump in the end. He doesn't know that, but it would be. So it's hard to know. It's hard to know in a lot of areas how to think, how to react. It's just so confusing. I always said that before 2016, I thought I understood American politics pretty well. I'm a student of the game. I've written about it for 100 years. I've been everywhere and done everything in covering this stuff. I thought I understood it. And when Trump won in 2016, everything that I thought I understood was turned upside down. It was like I didn't understand anything anymore. I couldn't explain Trump through any of the stuff that I had learned and seen. I couldn't explain it. And I'm still struggling to explain it, but I think I have a better handle on it now. The confusion that began with his first term, when you can remember the first part of his first term, he did some really crazy things. He cut off predominantly Muslim countries from coming here, and did a couple of other really crazy things right away. But they didn't hold up, and there was a Democratic Senate during that period. And but this time, there's no telling what he'll do. I mean, he's got this birthright citizenship. There's no part of the Constitution that I wish the Second Amendment were as clear as the 14th Amendment on birthright citizenship.
Right.
We don't know what the hell the Second Amendment means, but the 14th Amendment on birthright citizenship is pretty plain words. Everybody who's born here gets to be a citizen. That's it. It's just what it says.
Right.
Plain language. There's no argument about it. And yet he always has made this case, but now he's making this case in courts, and that hasn't been shut down yet. I mean, the Supreme Court, they had a chance in this last thing they were doing just to shut that down, because they've gone to different kinds of rulings when they're on one issue, and one that's related, they go to that issue and make a ruling, usually one that's horrible. But they could have knocked out birthright citizenship right there, because it's a home run. I mean, I don't even know if Alito and Thomas would vote for it. It's plain, it's plain language. I mean, couldn't be plainer. They're still working on that. And why do they have those troops on the border? Why do they have all these troops on the border? I mean, I think what Trump wants to do is to get Mexico to allow it to come in and fight the cartels with our army.
Jesus.
I think that's what he wants to do. Mexico's never going to allow that.
No. I've got a harder question for you.
Yeah.
I think the most harmful legacy of the Trump administration, or Trump in general, has been what he's done to the idea of truth. Nothing matters. He says whatever, whether it has any basis in fact or not. How do we fix truth?
That's a great question and a difficult question. I think it's going to be set back for a good while. So, I'm a cynical newspaper columnist, and politicians lie. Lots of politicians lie, but generally speaking, as I said, Trump has turned everything upside down. Generally speaking, when a politician is caught in a lie, they stop saying the lie. They may not admit they were wrong. They may not admit they lied, but they stop saying the lie. Cory Gardner got so embarrassed about claiming he had this thing in his suit pocket about his health insurance, which he never produced for anybody. Eventually people like me and you guys and other people embarrass him too much, he stops saying it. And
Right.
because that's what normally happens. That's what normally happens. Politicians just back away from when they've been caught in a lie. Trump, you can't catch him in a lie. He doesn't know half the time which is a lie or what isn't a lie. And he wants things that he thinks are true to be true, whether they are or not. Like tariffs is a great example. He thinks that tariffs will work. He thinks tariffs are great for the United States and will work for the global economy. He thinks that. He's not lying when he says that. I mean, he lies every other word he says, but he's not lying when he says that. So you don't know which is a lie, but he has the greatest staff available to him of all time. So he repeats things that are lies that he doesn't check. So he
Right.
has, he's got a staff, size of New York City, and he can check anything before he puts on his Truth Social, right? He doesn't. So he doesn't check. That's why he thinks I believe he probably thinks that that Kilmar Abrego is the middle name in there
Garcia, yeah.
has Garcia, right? Has MS-13 on his. I think he believes that. Obviously it was a really bad Photoshop, and I guess AI wasn't available or something, and so I think he believes that it's there. Somebody told him it was, and I think he believes it was, that it's there. And there's pictures that show that it's not, but I think he believes it. So, and also another thing, we talk about AI. So AI could distort the truth in a more effective fashion than any media we've ever had, I think.
Mhm.
So that is going to also make it harder. Can you trust your eyes anymore? What's the saying?
Right.
Believe none of
Me
what
or
you
my
hear and
lagging eyes.
but I
Yeah.
don't know
Right.
if we can even believe half of what we see. You need to see like 6 pictures or something to see if they all fit together from different sources to see whether it's
Right.
true or not.
I don't know if you've seen this new Google AI video thing that just came out like last week, but it is absolutely terrifying. It is indistinguishable from reality. It is very, very scary. So I agree with you. I want to close with a question that may bring us back to at least a little bit of a hopeful side. Jason and I actually had the pleasure of meeting with a sort of new, younger reporter in Colorado politics last week. We just had a great conversation with this person. They asked us for a piece of advice, so I'm going to ask you for the same advice, which is if you had any one piece of advice to give to a young journalist who's just starting a career in politics in this environment, what would you tell them about maintaining integrity while staying relevant, or any other tips for a new political reporter coming into the game right now?
Okay, I'm actually pretty hopeful about that, and the media is expanding in a lot of ways. Local media is in much more trouble and difficulty than national media.
Sure.
So there are a lot of sources. How could you do your job without the internet, right? You couldn't begin to do your job. So I worked in the days before the internet. I don't know how I did it. So there's so much possibility out there. Man. You look at people who do Substacks, right? So a lot of famous people went on to Substack and they had a base going, but there are a lot of people who have really built up a base just by being on Substack. And you get a lot of interesting opinion, and all that opinion is, or I shouldn't say all, a lot of that opinion is untarnished because they're
Mhm.
not answering to anybody except their readers.
Right.
So that's, to me, is a really hopeful sign. It took media a long time to say Donald Trump was a liar. Now everybody just
Right.
says he's a liar. No, so you can read in the news pages of the New York Times and the Washington Post, Trump is a liar. It took a long time for them to get there because it's antithetical to journalism. So
Right.
you can't say he's lying because you don't know what's in his brain. You don't know what he's thinking. You don't know if he's lying or if he's mistaken or if he's on drugs or you don't know what he is. Just to say he's lying is antithetical to journalism. But Trump became such a special case that all mainstream media now says he's lying about this. And the fact check became this really important thing when Trump took over. The fact check became critical part of reading. I think there is room for journalism to grow. And I think there are a lot of obstacles in the way, but I think there are a lot of people who still want good journalism.
Well, Mike Littwin, legendary columnist for the Colorado Sun, the Denver Post, and too many other newspapers to name. It was so great to talk to you. It has been amazing to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on the Get More Smarter podcast. If you want to catch Mike's column, it's in the Colorado Sun. You can get it early by being a subscriber. I think it come out on Wednesdays and Sundays.
Yes.
Very good. Mike
Wednesdays
Littwin.
and Sundays, all right. I really enjoy being on with you guys. It was a lot of fun.
Hey, thanks so much, Mike.
Thanks,
We'll
Mike.
talk to you soon, man. Take care out there. One of the coolest things I ever got to do, and I don't know, I think this is because I was just a Progress Now at the time. Littwin was writing, I think it was for 2018 or 2020, I can't remember. He was writing this thing for the Colorado Independent where he would call me, Alan Salazar, friend of the show, the full Salazar, Josh Penry, and maybe Dick Wadhams, and interview all of us about like the news of the week. And then he like wrote a column about like, what do these guys say? That was like the most fun I ever had. And when I was like,
It's a good idea.
I actually like matter in this state. Like Mike Littwin gives a shit what I think, you know?
Yeah. No, he's great to talk to. And he had a really long, very successful sports writing career before he got into politics.
I know. One of the questions that ended up on the cutting room floor was from a column he wrote for the Baltimore Sun in 1986. You guys can actually go and look this up. I'll try and remember to put it in the show notes and in the Substack, where he, first of all, says that this thing called the USFL, which the United States Football League, I guess it was before it merged with the NFL. This is all shit I don't understand or know anything about.
No, it was a separate league. Trump even had a team in there.
Well, so that's the point of the thing I pulled out, was that he said the NFL is a threat to democracy and maybe Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. And he said this in 1986, which is 1 year after I was born.
Yeah, I guess, you could have seen this coming in some ways, in many ways not. But let's start off this week with what is one of the all-time fails in at least modern Colorado politics from my perspective.
It really is. Like, this is an all-timer.
1 week after voting for the big, beautiful bullshit bill in the House of Representatives that would gut Medicaid and food stamps, endanger Medicare, and add more than $3 trillion to the federal deficit, Congressman Gabe Evans decided to hold a press conference on the steps of the state capitol, not in his district, to talk more about this awful thing he supported.
And it's equally weird because Gabe Evans, I think we know this, lives in Washington, D.C. He wasn't coming here to do constituent work. He wasn't coming here because he doesn't do that. Wasn't coming here to do a town hall because he doesn't do that. It feels like he flew out here to do this. So there were lots of opportunities for him to decide this is not a very good idea. But what happened instead?
He stood at a podium alongside Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, Weld County Sheriff Steve Reams, who's like the token guy in uniform for Republicans, and Republican state lawmakers Carlos Barron, who I've never heard of, and Byron Pelton. A huge crowd of protesters shouted as Evans tried to conduct his press conference, shouting things like, "Do your job," and "Gabe, you suck." Meanwhile, Evans repeated nonsense talking points about how this is only going to go after waste, fraud, and abuse, and how this is about protecting the American dream for Coloradans, yada, yada, yada.
Wait, I actually have a clip from a friend of the show, Marshall Zellinger from Blue.
Needed most. This is about protecting Medicaid, protecting the American dream, protecting.
Not going great, man.
Remember, the Congressional Budget Office says Medicaid will need to be cut by at least $700 billion in order to reach the numbers in the House budget bill. Those cuts will drive up insurance rates for everyone else, with some estimates suggesting as much as 30% increases to make up for the millions of people who would suddenly be uninsured. Here's an absolutely brutal recap on the day from 9 News.
Other friend of the show, Kyle Clark.
Republican Congressman Gabe Evans is avoiding town halls in his district, where he is likely to get booed and questioned for supporting Medicaid cuts. Evans did appear outside his congressional district today in Denver, where he was booed by protesters organized by a liberal group. And he was questioned about his support for Medicaid cuts. by our Marshall Zellinger.
So the question from Marshall was,
Like a teacher repeating the question for all the class to hear, Republican Congressman Gabe Evans needed to listen closely and talk loud enough to overcome protesters who showed up at his news conference about the one big beautiful bill that passed the House last week.
Congressman, how many of the 214,000 on Medicaid in your district are cheats that need to be kicked off?
After repeating my question for all to hear, here's what Evans said.
we went through the answer, Marshall. You got illegal immigrants. You've got people who are ineligible for the program. Those are the ones who will be removed from the program. And then we have 4.8 million people across the country, able-bodied, working-aged adults with no dependents, who have the ability to choose to go to work or school or volunteer part-time in order to keep their Medicaid benefits.
I'm looking for a number in your district who are in those categories.
People who are no longer eligible for Medicaid.
Do you not know the number? That sounds
Yeah, I'm telling you
anecdotal.
the number right now. You may not like the answer, but that's the answer. Next question.
Categories of people are not numbers. I do not have an answer. Colorado's Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing reports Medicaid covers 214,218 people in Evans's congressional district, which covers Adams and Weld counties and a sliver of Larimer, with $881 million paid to providers in Congressional District 8. I had a couple more questions to ask, and after the news conference, Evans said he had a hard out at 10 a.m. It was 9:54 when he started walking up the steps of the state capitol.
Congressman, it's not 10 yet. So, how do people off Medicaid and into emergency rooms for uncompensated care help medical providers?
Marshall's literally running up the stairs after him.
Do you want illegal immigrants on Medicaid, Marshall?
I raced a train. I can go up the steps. Asking questions for specific answers and not getting them for you is not great. After the Evans event, Democrats in the state legislature held their own virtual news conference. They're currently planning behind the scenes in case more budget cuts are needed because of Medicaid changes. Evans made a statement about savings to states when people who don't belong on Medicaid are taken off. Democratic State Senator Jeff Bridges, a member of the Joint Budget Committee, said today that the state's health care policy people estimate a double-digit million-dollar cost to the states to administer new Medicaid eligibility verifications.
There's not $57 million worth of health care that's being provided to people who don't qualify for Medicaid, but it will cost us $57 million to comply with these new requirements. That's government waste.
Hell yeah.
The state's healthcare policy people told me today that the state is not estimating currently who would lose Medicaid because the bill provisions in Congress continue to change. I was also told statewide there are 377,000 people who receive Medicaid as part of the Affordable Care Act expansion, and at most, around 166,000 might be at risk of losing coverage under the new work requirements. Again, that's statewide, not the question I was asking Evans, specific to Congressional District 8.
Which is interesting because his congressional district has the second highest percentage of Medicaid recipients in the state, surpassed only by Jeff Hurd's district on the Western Slope. Hurd has expressed some hesitancy about these Medicaid cuts, whereas Evans has made it his entire personality. Gabe Evans's political persona right now is cut Medicaid.
You can imagine there are almost 1.2 million people in the state who receive Medicaid, and all 1.2 million may be like, what's going on? And most of them are probably going to be fine because the people who should be worried the most might be the work eligibility ones, perhaps. But you can just imagine 1 in 4 people in Colorado are like, am I going to have health coverage in a few weeks?
Also,
So, a couple things there. That last thing Kyle said about Medicaid cuts becoming Gabe Evans's entire political persona, keep an eye out because you're going to see that a lot. And secondly, little pod brag, everyone in that segment who was not Gabe Evans or Lauren Boebert is a friend of the pod.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Jeff Bridges, Marshall, and Kyle.
This story was covered widely by Denver Post, Colorado Public Radio. Lots of really good quotes coming out of this. There's one particularly from Colorado Public Radio by a woman named Ernestine Garcia, who lives in Evans's district, said, quote, "We are protesting against the bill that cuts Medicaid and food assistance, takes food out of hungry kids' mouths. Not only that, they want to take it and give a massive tax break to the billionaires, the upper 1%. And so it's like killing us so that they could have more," unquote.
Yeah, let's get her in an ad.
I understand why Evans voted for this bill. He's just doing his job as a rubber stamp. What I don't get is why he keeps talking about it.
This was a totally unforced error, a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the career. I don't understand it either. I think this was marching orders because there's a bunch of Republicans who went out to try and defend this and had to eat shit sandwiches all over the country. But you don't put the third most competitive guy in the third most competitive district in the country on the chopping block for this thing. There was no winning here.
No.
At all. Whether or not there were protesters, he's trying to sell a deeply unpopular policy. He should be smart enough to know that. I'm not certain that he is. But I guess we have to ask the question, like, why is he doing this?
I think the marching orders is right. I think what they're trying to do is repeat the waste, fraud, and abuse line enough that maybe it gets picked up widely and people don't notice that they don't have health care in the fall. I don't know.
I mean, here's U.S. Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa trying to pull the same thing and getting the same result.
So people are not, well, we all are going to die. So, for heaven's sakes. So,
why worry about it? We're all going to die.
Vote MAGA 2026. We're all going to die.
In his press availability, Evans also repeated another line that hasn't aged well. As Colorado Public Radio reports, he said he's spoken with immigrations and customs enforcement officials and says, quote, they are targeting the folks who have court-issued orders for removal. These are the folks that are being targeted. They're going after the gangsters, not the grandmas, unquote. He's said this before.
This line sucks ass, especially because now we have a bunch of fucking grandmas and non-gangsters who have been deported.
Yeah. CPR later reported on a Colorado family, including a child, detained by federal authorities when they came for a routine check-in at Denver's immigration court. There was also a story this week about a grandmother who was here legally in the country, 3 kids, has been here decades, and is now being deported. So
no criminal
not
record,
grandmas didn't
by the
turn
way
out to be true.
It turns out it's more like grandmas, not gangsters.
Right. And before we move on from Evans, we wanted to note another ridiculous roll call piece that quoted Evans talking about non-political things.
First of all, every picture of this guy is a dick pic.
He does not photograph well.
And second of all, this is the funniest fucking line I've ever heard in my life. In the quick hits section of this roll call article, last book you read? The only book I really have time to read at this point is the Bible, which is actually maybe true in this guy's case because he's a little bit. Although you have to question the reading comprehension ability, because if all he's reading is the Bible, chances are he would probably end up, I don't know, welcoming the immigrant and aiding the poor and helping the sick instead of all this other shit that is the opposite. And of course, the last part is I am rereading The Art of the Deal. What a fucking toe sucker.
He also says on that piece that he still wears his police boots in Congress, which fits because all his answers always start with, as a former police officer.
Right. I'm surprised he doesn't wear his military fatigues underneath his suit at the same time.
Meanwhile, a Republican congressman from the 3rd Congressional District, Jeff,
who is our
Sandwich
first, he's our first favorite Republican congressman from Colorado. We can just say that, right?
Sure, yeah. The bread sandwich is eating a shit sandwich of his own making. After promising to protect rural health care during his 2024 campaign, and even signing a letter opposing proposed Medicaid cuts, like in April, Hurd caved and voted for the big, beautiful bill. And then here's what he told the Grand Junction Daily Sentinel. The Sentinel says, quote, you represent a district where 26.3% of people are enrolled in Medicaid, and you ran on protecting Medicaid. The bipartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates changes to Medicaid funding as well as new work requirements could see roughly $700 billion in Medicaid funding cuts, impacting roughly 8.6 million people nationwide. Does this concern you? Here's what Hurd had to say. Quote, what this bill does is strengthen Medicaid for those who need it most. It's essential for me that we preserve this critical safety net for rural Coloradans, and I think this bill takes steps in the right direction by making sure that the dollars we spend on Medicaid are for those who need it the most, like pregnant moms, children, those who are disabled, senior citizens who are dual eligible with Medicare, to make sure that the dollars we have for those most vulnerable groups is available. work requirements as a way to make sure that able-bodied adults are not utilizing resources that would better be used for those who need it the most. Yada, yada, yada. Waste, fraud, abuse.
Essentially indistinguishable from Evans's nonsense, right? I mean, it's the same lie. We're cutting it so we can keep it for those who need it most. I'm cutting down this tree so I can preserve the stump for the squirrels who need it most.
For all the people who want shade.
Right.
Perhaps Jeff Hurd should have tried a different approach, like this one from a Nebraska Republican Representative Mike Flood. He was asked at a town hall meeting about a provision in the big bill that allows the Trump administration to basically avoid contempt charges by the judicial branch.
Yeah, this seems like not about healthcare.
Yeah, and here's what Flood said, which is really not a great answer. Quote, "I'm not going to hide the truth. This provision was unknown to me when I voted for that bill. And when I found out the provision was in the bill, I immediately reached out to my Senate counterparts and told them of my concern," unquote. I didn't bother to read it.
Well, I mean, it's a 1,000-page bill, so, hard to do. Understood. Now the shoe's on the other foot with the page count.
But we're not in Congress. We knew it was in there.
Yeah, no, because it was widely fucking reported as they snuck this ultra scary thing in the bill that's going to make Trump's administration impervious to the judiciary. Not great.
No. All right, let's switch over to Governor Jared Polis. As we discussed in our last episode, Polis, as expected, vetoed the Worker Protection Act, a bill that would have changed the Labor Peace Act to make it easier for workers to join a union, getting rid of that second election that has a ridiculous 75% threshold. Polis then later issued two other surprising vetoes, among several others, but these were surprising. One was on surprise ambulance billing, which passed through both chambers of the legislature with unanimous support, which is pretty rare in Colorado.
Extremely rare, as in I don't know of another bill that passed unanimously this session.
House Bill 1088 sought to add transparency requirements for ambulances and set reimbursement rates for out-of-network services. Polis, in his veto letter, said that the surprise bills could be devastating to Coloradans' personal finances, but that he thought maybe... Actually, I don't really understand why he vetoed this.
I don't know either. I didn't read the veto letter, the link that I just shared.
I did, but I didn't get
article.
It didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I think, the latter part of this is the only thing I can read as like a potential justification, which is the bill would have helped make sure people didn't hesitate to call 911. So something in there is making it appear that people would be less inclined to call 911 if they knew they were not going to pay a big bill. No, I don't get it either.
He also vetoed a bill rent-setting algorithms.
This is like Real Page, so like these companies that use these AI tools to see if they can squeeze another $18 a month out of everybody. And I mean, for each individual rent payer, it's like, dozens or hundreds of dollars a year. But in total, it's billions of dollars that are being transferred from renters to their landlords with this shit.
Last year, the Biden White House estimated that these price-fixing sites cost Denver tenants $1,600 in additional rent each year.
Yeah.
Polis said he vetoed it because he has concerns about prohibiting companies using algorithmic pricing software derived from multiple data sources from doing business in Colorado. I mean, I guess this is sort of the unintended consequences argument, but...
Oh, no, we won't have any more landlords stealing money from people.
Right.
In a shitty state as this.
You and I have both been fans of Polis for a long time, but I don't get what he's doing lately. These don't make any sense to me.
I mean, it's clear that like there's this pro-business streak running through. I'm being as generous as I can here.
Yeah.
The governor's thought process at the moment, and maybe to play devil's advocate and just try and take a side, like maybe he feels like the progressive stuff has gone too far, too fast. He's worried that it's going to have an effect on the economy. He's very popular, partly because Colorado's had a really good economy the entire time he's governor. Maybe he's freaked out that changing too many things too fast on the side of regular people, it's not coming out great, Jason. I don't know what to do, is going to make things more expensive, but it's not, because you actually don't want companies like this in your state. I'm sorry to say it. Like, you don't want extractive tech companies coming in to bilk people out of money, to put more money in the pockets of people who are already have more companies that have more money they could spend in several lifetimes, especially when part of your narrative is you're going to make things more affordable for regular people, especially when you're trying to save people money on things like housing. So this one, I don't get. He vetoed it last year, I think, and told, or maybe it didn't pass, I don't remember, but he told the sponsors, like, go back, try again, do a stakeholder process, see what you can do. It's my understanding they did that. So, and there were lots of policy changes made to the bill. So I'm just not clear on what this is. And it doesn't look like there's any opportunity to try again until we have a different governor, which I think is a shame, because this is, in my opinion, an obvious one that, you know, any Democrat or progressive or liberal or whatever should be behind.
Polis is term limited, of course, in 2026. So this won't affect him at the ballot box in Colorado, but I think it's going to make it hard for him to accomplish much of anything in his final legislative session next year, because that's a lot of goodwill he's flushed down the toilet here.
And the question is, like, for what?
Right.
To what end? Just to make sure RealPage can keep making billions of dollars, nickel and diming people to death? I'm sorry, I don't buy it.
Let's talk about Donald Trump.
It's Taco Tuesday on the pod.
Yeah, we may soon rename this to Taco Time. If you missed the latest memes going on all around the internet, Trump has picked up this nickname called Taco, which stands for Trump Always Chickens Out. NBC News, for example, listed 10 different cases of Trump caving on tariffs already in his first few months back in office. This makes Trump very sad, this taco thing. Here he is in a press conference getting very angry with the reporter who asked the question.
Analysts have coined a new term called the taco trade. They're saying Trump always chickens out on your tariff threats, and that's why markets are higher this week. What's your response to that?
I kick out?
Chicken out.
Oh, and then I chicken out. I've never heard that. You mean because I reduced China from 145% that I set down to 100 and then down to another number? And said you have to open up the whole country, and because I gave the European Union a 50% tax tariff, and they called up and they said, please, let's meet right now. Please, let's meet right now. And I said, okay, I'll give you till June 9. I actually asked them, I said, what's the date? Because they weren't willing to meet. And after I did what I did, they said, we'll meet anytime you want. And we have an end date of July 9th. You call that chickening out? 6 months ago, this country was stone cold dead. We had a dead country. We had a country people didn't think it was going to survive, and you ask a nasty question like that. It's called negotiation, but don't ever say what you said. That's a nasty question. Go ahead.
Don't call him Taco.
I guess we know what we're calling him now. You know, I had a friend who I was talking to about this last night, and they said, you know, this really sucks because, like, tacos are, like, my favorite thing in the world, and now I have to, like, think about tacos when I think about Donald Trump. Like, is there nothing he can't ruin? I'm like, just think about it like you're using the thing you love the most to hurt the person who you hate the most.
I mean, really, the worst thing he could have done was shown how much this hurt him personally, because
now
it'll never end.
It's kind of like, please don't vandalize Teslas. Okay.
Right. Russian state media is also mocking Trump. Trump has been sending out Truth Social things, being more critical of Russian President Vladimir Putin than he has in the past. And RT.com, which is basically the Russian state media, which is basically just, you know, Putin's office, says in a social media post, quote, President Trump warns Moscow, claiming Russia avoided really bad consequences only thanks to him. Putin doesn't realize he's playing with fire. Trump's message leaves little room for misinterpretation until he posts the opposite tomorrow morning.
It's getting fucking dunked on from, like, reporters and Russia, and it's great. I love it. And then this isn't on the list here, but he also, like, went after Leonard Leo, the architect of the Federalist Society. Did you see that?
Yeah, saying that all these judges that are ruling against him are activist judges, even though they've been appointed by Republicans, some of them appointed by him.
Amazing stuff.
Which actually brings me just to a new Trump re-election theory I have. Maybe a big lawyer backed him so that they could rake in money from filing lawsuits against all of his terrible ideas.
3D chess from the white shoe legal world. It's a better explanation than any I can conjure. So sure, let's go with that.
Trump's tariffs. At one point, the international tariff or International Court on Trade or something, I forget the name of it, ruled that Trump did not have the authority to unilaterally impose new tariffs. The Trump administration appealed. They got a brief stay, but it looks like this probably isn't going to end up in his favor. As the Washington Post writes, more than 4 months into his term, Trump's trade war strategy has led to a cul-de-sac of his own making.
Love it.
Here's Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick telling Fox News, well, everything's fine in the end. And before you hear this, just keep in mind that the annual GDP of the United States is around $28 trillion.
I think he knows he's going to win because he's got to protect the American people. He's got to protect the American workers. He's got $10 trillion coming to build factories in America, and he's going to stand for the American people. And he's got lots of other authorities, but I think this one's going to work, and it's going to hold. You just have to get real judges. I think.
And right underneath this is like my new favorite thing from the website that used to be called Twitter, which is when people go like, hey, Grok, what are the chances these new investments materialize? And Elon Musk's AI says, the $10 trillion investment claim seems overstated. White House data shows 4.3 to 5. So if you take them at their word, it's only half.
With $10 trillion, it would be more than a third of the entire United States gross domestic product. That's not happening.
They know a bunch of suckers will buy it. They know a bunch of people will believe it. They know a bunch of Republican Congress people will repeat it, and it will become fact for 30-something% of the population.
And finally, the Trump administration may need to start rehiring some of the copy editors that apparently were fired in recent months. There was a new Make America Healthy Again report that came out from the Department of Health and Human Services and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The report that White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt called the greatest report ever made in the history of reports or something like that. Turns out this is all horseshit, and most of it includes references from AI, clearly. Apparently, you can tell by the URLs if something is AI, but it references a bunch of studies that don't exist.
This is like a common thing. If you like go ask AI, like, hey, I need to write a book report on this subject. Can you help me do that? It will just make up sources in order to answer the question. And what's called AI hallucination.
And then they just printed that and said, here it is.
So here's one. One reference in the initial version of the report cited a study titled Overprescribing of Oral Corticosteroids for Children with Asthma to buttress the idea that children are over-medicated. But that study didn't appear to exist. There's a similar pediatrics article from 2017 with the same first author but different co-authors. Later Thursday, that pediatrics article was swapped in for the apparently non-existent study in the version of the report available online. I also want to note that I guess I was wrong. The Washington Post still has Democracy Dies in Darkness on their masthead, which is hilarious because they're not fucking helping.
This wasn't the only problem that they've had recently in the Trump administration. The Department of Homeland Security released a list of sanctuary jurisdictions defying federal law done under an executive order. Before they get to the list, there's a paragraph that says, quote, note that the list can be reviewed and changed at any time and will be updated regularly. No one should act on this information without conducting their own evaluation of the information, unquote.
No vigilante justice on sanctuary states or cities until you confirm that is in fact what is going on.
That's a good idea because the list includes 41 of Colorado's 64 counties, including Kiowa County, home to about 1,400 people. I don't know where they're hiding the immigrants and why you can't find them in the county that small. They also included a list of Colorado cities, including Lafayette, North Glen, and Dillon. All
this
of which
is like
were
if you ordered these cities from Wish. Dillon it has 2 L's for no reason. North Glen is missing an N, and Lafayette is, I think, Revolutionary Frenchman and not a town in Colorado.
I also clicked on the listing for Kansas, and it lists the county as Lawrence and the city of Douglas County. I think they got that backward. Great work.
This is why AI shouldn't be, among other things, setting rents.
And yeah, Yeah.
Discriminating against people looking for health care.
And don't fire federal employees who would have caught this stuff.
That one. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is, I think we've talked about this in the show before, but this writer, Cory Doctorow, came up with this idea called the inshitification of everything, which is when you just hand over everything that human beings used to do to like bad AI tools and expect anything other than what is happening right now. And it's just fucking everything up.
All right, let's update the 2026 elections here in Colorado. We've got a new candidate, at least one, in Colorado Congressional District 8, where Gabe Evans is almost certainly a one-term congressman. State Representative Shannon Byrd is ending her campaign for the state Senate in order to join that Democratic field, which includes State Rep Manny Ruttenell and former Congresswoman Yadira Caraveo. And there's a new poll out, according to the Springs Gazette papers. Caraveo, an internal poll from Caraveo, reports that she holds a double-digit lead in the primary.
Was this an internal poll? I thought this was just PPP coming in to do it and make some...
The story calls it an internal poll. I don't know.
But interesting.
Public policy polling says that Caraveo is the choice of 36% of Democratic primary voters. I'm not surprised by this. There's really no reason people should know the name Manny Ruttenell or Shannon Byrd quite yet.
I think it's more interesting to point out the fact that not only does she get 36% of the vote, but the next closest are Manny Ruttenell at 8% and State Treasurer in front of the pod, Dave Young, at 8%, which is 4 times as many percentage as either one of those candidates get. So while if you're the incumbent, which she's not, but she's the closest thing to an incumbent in that district, you want to be closer to 50. The fact that she's 36% and her next closest is 4 orders of magnitude behind her makes me feel pretty confident that Dr. Caraveo is probably going to end up as the nominee again. But I wanted to ask you a question about this. Do you think a robust primary with up to 5 candidates, maybe 6, in this district is a good thing to help us kind of find the best person to take on Gabe Evans and win? Or do you think it jeopardizes the seat to have this chaotic an environment?
I tend to think in this case it's probably good because it will keep the spotlight on the district, keep the spotlight on Evans, unless the Democratic candidates dig up skeletons that are really problematic and air that information and it hurts the eventual winner of the primary. I mean, that's always the risk, but I think the reward is that there will just be more focus on this race and this issue, particularly of Medicaid.
I'm not worried about it either. I think primaries are generally good things. We should have choices. We should have a debate. We should have a conversation. And as long as everybody pulls together and endorses the Democrat and gets behind them and helps them win at the end of the road, which should happen here because Gabe Evans is just so objectionable, then I think the more the merrier. Let him in, see what happens, and may the best person get nominated.
And in this case, like with Caraveo, she's polling well now, but she needs to prove she can have a campaign that can build on that and not just, wait until November 2026 to see if that worked. And then in Congressional District 3, apparently there's a Democrat who announced in April, and I just found out about because I got a text message from the candidate's name is Alex Keloff.
He's the ski guy. He's the co-founder of Armada Skis, a skiing company based in the district.
He's a Democrat from Snowmass. His campaign manager is apparently a screenwriter and former Yale classmate named Eric Lodel. I've never heard of this guy, Keloff, but
one of those fucking things where like, I'll just get my college buddy to do it. Anybody can run a campaign, right, guys?
Yeah, I'll run for Congress. All right. Well, I mean,
with that,
the fact that neither of us had even heard of him is probably not great, but
I mean, I do think that Hurd is vulnerable after voting for this asinine fucking big bullshit bill. And like, he's going to shut down half the fucking rural hospitals in his district for no goddamn reason. Like, I don't know.
But is it
Hurd
a Yaley
still
from Snowmass who's going to do it?
Yeah, it feels unlikely, doesn't it?
Don't know.
Bread sandwich versus a Yaley from Snowmass.
Yeah. Let's do a couple of quick hits and then we'll get out of here. The ass-kissing by Republicans when it comes to Donald Trump is ramping up to a new level. Here's Fox 5 in Washington, D.C. So the story is essentially that Republican Congressman Greg Steube Stubby?
Go with Stooby-Dooby-Doo.
Has introduced legislation that would block federal funding to the Washington Metropolitan Area Transportation Authority unless it changes its name to the Washington Metropolitan Authority for Greater Access, MAGA, and renames one of the lines for Donald Trump.
This is the same bullshit with the Gulf of Mexico and the Gulf of America and all this nonsense. It's this obsession with naming shit. It's the same thing Donald Trump did with his businesses. All he cared about was slapping Trump on a hotel, never built anything. And what else is new? I mean, it's just that it has infected and destroyed the entire party. It's so dumb. And it's just like the most like disgusting foot kissing bullshit I've ever seen in my life.
Just a waste of time.
Trump.
One of the worst senators in the United States, and maybe one of the worst in a long time, is leaving to run for governor. Former football coach Tommy Tuberville is a one-term senator who is going to stay a one-term senator because he's going to run for governor of Alabama. This is the same guy who's been trying to move Space Force to Alabama. He held up a bunch of military promotions for like a year because of some abortion issue that he didn't really seem to understand. This is also the same guy who once said that the three branches of the American government are the House, Senate, and presidency.
Awesome stuff. Yeah, that's just great. And
no one will miss him in the Senate.
Probably gonna win because it's Alabama.
He'll probably be governor of Alabama, but that's their problem now.
What do they say? Roll Tide.
Except he was the coach of the Auburn Tigers.
Whoops. Don't roll Tide.
Yeah, unroll Tide. Let's go to our fuck around and find out of the week. Here's Trump supporter Roseanne Barr, still alive, talking with Alec Jones, still alive.
I hate it here. So much I hate it here.
Trump's tariff things, a lot of people I know have lost their jobs over that. And
it's serious, yeah.
And I hope that his turnaround happens very quickly because people have suffered enough.
President Trump, as a longtime supporter of your mission and to make it great again, I want to be a part of that with you.
Sorry. Okay, yeah.
God, it's the Roseanne one.
Yeah.
Yeah, not a surprise. He knew this was going to happen. He
Again,
wrote it down.
Donald Trump is the biggest liar on the face of the earth, but he does what he says he's going to do when it comes to terrible ideas. So you have to actually take him seriously. And surprise, surprise, here we are.
And finally, our gibberish of the week. Here's Trump giving the commencement address at West Point over the Memorial Day weekend, among other things.
Trophy one. It didn't work out too well, but that doesn't work out too well. I must tell you, a lot of trophy wives doesn't work out. But it made him happy for a little while at least. But he found a new wife. He sold his little boat and he got a big yacht. He had one of the biggest yachts anywhere in the world. He moved for a time to Monte Carlo and he led the good life. And time went by and he got bored. And 15 years later, the company that he sold to called him and they said, the housing business is not for us. You have to understand, when Bill Levitt was hot, when he had momentum, he'd go to the job sites every night. He'd pick up every loose nail. He'd pick up every scrap of wood. If there was a bolt or a screw laying on the ground, he'd pick it up and he'd use it the next day in putting together a house, a trophy.
This is the commencement address for the West Point Military Academy. You have worked your ass off. You have gotten into an elite institution, spent 4 years serving the country and preparing for a career in service, and this is how. Just so fucking embarrassing. He also, in the middle of this thing, said something like, nobody joined the military under Joe Biden. Everyone's joining them. These are graduates. They literally had joined the military
Took
under
him 4
Joe Biden.
years, do the math. Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
All right, that's it for us this week.
The Get More Smarter podcast is a production of ColoradoPolis.com and the Bighorn Company. Your hosts are me, Ian Silveri, and America's dad,
Jason Bain,
who managed to figure out how to engineer and produce this thing. I do the video sometimes. Megan does the video a lot of times. She does a lot of other stuff too. Thanks, Megan.
Thanks, Megan.
Ringmaster Cylinder made the theme song. Get your shots while you still can. Protect your trans kids, your autistic kids, and any other kids in your life. Really. Send us a message if you do, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, a comment on Spotify, or reply to a post on Blue Sky. We might read it here on the internet. Don't you want to be famous? Subscribe on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Rate the show and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts if you got more smarter. It helps a lot. We have a new review this week. This one from That Danny, though. funny dude saying smart things, and vice versa. Highly recommended. Thanks that, Danny, though. If you send us a comment or leave us a review, we'll read it on the air. Really helps a lot. Find us at getmoresmarter.com where you can sign up for bonus content in our Substack, and please send all angry and non-angry rants and marketing materials and pitches for shows that are not ours to angryrants at getmoresmarter.com, other stuff to Ian at getmoresmarter.com, and other stuff to Jason at getmoresmarter.com. Thank you so much to the legendary Mike Littwin for being our guest today, and thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time. This one comes from insert edit here. You're not gonna. It's gonna be like this on the episode. I fucking know it. While I am scrolling this up.